The lace feels like spiderwebs against my skin. It's my sister's day, her perfect, sun-drenched, white-lace-and-rose-petal fantasy coming true. I plaster a smile on my face, the kind that aches at the corners because it doesn't reach my eyes. The air smells like expensive perfume and wilting flowers, thick with unspoken expectations. I see my mother across the room, her eyes sweeping over the crowd, cataloging, judging. She catches my eye, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face before the practiced smile returns. I look down at my hands, twisting the simple silver ring on my finger. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Growing up, my sister was the sun. Golden hair, easy smiles, popular with everyone. I was the moon, orbiting quietly, often in shadow. It wasn't a competition we created, but one that was constantly reinforced, mostly by my mother. Sarah was the sensible one, the pretty one, the one who made good choices. I was the dreamy one, the rebellious one, the one who needed constant correction. Our mother's love felt conditional, a prize to be won by conforming to her very specific mold of success, a respectable job, a stable life, and most importantly, a real man by her side. I tried for years. I dated the boys she approved of, the ones with sensible haircuts and polite manners and fathers who played golf at the right country club. It always felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. I felt stifled, pretending to care about quarterly reports and vacation homes when my head was full of abstract ideas and chaotic art. My relationships crumbled, one after another, leaving a trail of quiet disappointments in my mother's eyes. Each breakup was another mark against me, proof that I wasn't like Sarah, who always seemed to find the right kind of man. My mother never said it directly, not in so many words. Not then. It was in the sigh when I introduced her to someone who didn't fit her criteria. It was in the casual questions about his job, his family, his prospects, delivered with an air of veiled concern. It was in the way she'd praise Sarah's boyfriend. "He's so solid," she'd say, emphasizing the word like it was the highest possible virtue, while remaining pointedly silent about mine. The message was clear. I was drawn to the wrong kind of men, the unreliable ones, the ones who wouldn't provide the stable, predictable life she envisioned for me. And then came Thomas. I met him far away from the world my mother inhabited. There was no grand introduction, no vetting process. He was just there, in a dusty cafe in a city where I felt completely anonymous. He was quiet, thoughtful, with eyes that seemed to see right through the surface. He didn't talk about money or status or career ladders. He talked about ideas, about art, about the quiet spaces in the world. He was different. Completely, beautifully different from anyone I'd ever known. Our relationship grew in stolen moments, in hushed phone calls across time zones, in sudden, unexpected trips. He was intensely private, not out of secrecy, but out of a deep-seated aversion to the spotlight. He had built his life away from the noise, valuing quiet moments and genuine connection over public acclaim. It was a life I understood, a life that resonated with my own desire for something real and untouched by expectation. When we decided to get married, it was a quiet promise between us. No elaborate proposal, just a shared certainty. Introducing him to my mother was a challenge. Thomas agreed, understanding how important it was to me. He wore a simple suit, spoke politely, and answered her questions with quiet grace. My mother, ever the subtle interrogator, couldn't find the easy hooks she was used to. His job was complicated. His background wasn't easily categorized. He didn't brag, didn't name drop. To her, he was an enigma, and not in a good way. She smiled, of course. She was always polite. But later, the sighs were deeper. The questions about my future more pointed. "Are you sure about him, dear? He seems different." Not quite established. I defended him, of course. But the old doubts, planted by years of subtle criticism, had shallow roots and were easily stirred. Was he established enough? Was he real in the way the world, or at least my mother, defined it? It felt ridiculous, insulting to him, but the whispers of insecurity were persistent, a familiar background noise to my life. So here I am, at Sarah's wedding. She looks radiant, every inch the blushing bride my mother always dreamed of. Her husband, Mark, is exactly what my mother calls a real man, tall, broad-shouldered, a lawyer with a partnership track, solid family, solid prospects. My mother beams at him, her approval so thick you could cut it with a knife. She takes my arm, pulling me slightly away from the main group. Her grip is a little too tight. "Isn't Sarah just radiant?" she whispers, her voice full of performative pride. "And Mark such a catch. A real man. So stable. So capable." She pauses, her eyes drifting over me, lingering on my dress, my hair, my simple jewelry. It's a familiar look, that subtle assessment followed by the implied comparison. "At least," she says, her voice dropping just low enough that only I can hear, the smile still plastered on her face for anyone who might glance our way, "at least she found a real man." The words land like tiny, sharp pebbles. At least she did, the implication hangs heavy in the air. I, by contrast, have not. My stomach tightens. The years of feeling less than, of not measuring up, condense into a single, hot wave of resentment and pain. It's not just a comment about Thomas. It's a dismissal of me, of my choices, of my entire life path because it doesn't fit her narrow, conventional definition of success and happiness. I want to lash out, to scream that Thomas is more real, more good, more everything than any of the cardboard cutouts she approves of. I want to tell her how happy I am, how loved I feel, in a way her real men could never provide. But the words catch in my throat. Decades of conditioning kick in. The little girl who craved her mother's approval still lives inside me, wincing at the familiar sting of disapproval. I manage a weak, tight-lipped smile. "Yes, Mother. Sarah looks beautiful. And Mark seems very nice." The understatement is deliberate, a tiny act of rebellion. She misses it or pretends to. Her gaze is already sweeping the room again, probably calculating the social capital accrued by Sarah's impressive wedding guest list. She doesn't see the effort it takes for me to hold myself together, to not let the tears well up. She doesn't see the quiet dignity of the man standing a little apart from the crowd, the man she just implicitly dismissed. The receiving line feels endless. Smile, hug, congratulations, repeat. Each well-meaning comment about Sarah's perfect day, her perfect groom, feels like another little jab. "Oh, isn't Mark just ideal?" someone gushes. "So happy for Sarah. She deserves such a solid partner." I nod, agree. Keep smiling. Inside, I'm crumbling. The air is thick with their collective affirmation of my mother's values. Values I have never fully embraced. Values that have always made me feel insufficient. Later, during the cocktail hour, the comments continue, sometimes more direct. An aunt, bless her heart, asks, "So, dear, are you seeing anyone? Anyone serious?" The emphasis on serious is heavy-handed. I mention Thomas. "Oh," she says, her eyebrows raising slightly. "And what does he do?" I give a vague answer, something about technology and investments, trying to avoid the details I know will invite further scrutiny. Her smile falters.
Well.
It's so important to have stability, isn't it? Especially these days. It's not malicious, not exactly, but it's the same song, different verse. Stability, security, predictability, the holy trinity of my mother's world, the things she believes my relationship lacks. I look over at Thomas. He's talking quietly to Sarah's maid of honor, listening intently, his expression calm and engaged. He seems completely unfazed by the social churn around him. He exists outside of it, comfortable in his own skin, utterly indifferent to external validation. It's one of the things I love most about him. He doesn't need the world to tell him who he is or what he's worth. But at this moment, surrounded by people who seem to value only the most conventional markers of success, his quiet confidence feels like a challenge to their norms and therefore a target. The wedding dinner is beautiful. Speeches are made, heartfelt, funny, sometimes a little embarrassing. The best man talks about Mark's reliability, his integrity, his bright future. The maid of honor talks about Sarah's kindness, her grace. My mother stands up, radiant in her mother of the bride dress. She speaks about Sarah, her beautiful daughter, finding her perfect match in Mark, a man of character and substance. She gets a little choked up, talking about how a mother just wants her children to be happy and secure. The word hangs in the air again, heavy with meaning. It's clear she's talking about Sarah and Mark having the kind of security she believes is the only kind that matters. The kind I, presumably, do not have. I pick at my food. The prime rib tastes like ash. Every word feels like a reinforcement of my status as the less successful daughter, the one who still hasn't quite figured it out. The judgment isn't just implied now, it's woven into the fabric of the celebration itself. My chest feels tight, like there's a hand squeezing my heart. I want to disappear. I want to run outside and breathe air that doesn't smell of judgment and expectation. Thomas reaches under the table and takes my hand. His grip is warm and firm. I look at him, and he gives me a small, knowing smile. He doesn't need to say anything. His presence is a silent anchor, a reminder that there is a world outside this ballroom, a world where our love, our life, is more than enough. But the sting of my mother's words, the accumulation of years of feeling inadequate, is a physical ache. I excuse myself after the main course, needing a moment to breathe. I found a quiet corner of the patio, looking out at the manicured gardens under the moonlight. The cool air helped, clearing my head slightly. Why does it still hurt so much? Why do I still crave her approval, even now, when I'm a grown woman with a life and a partner I love? The answer is complicated, tangled in the messy history of family and the deep-seated need to be seen and accepted by the people who raised you. As I stood there, trying to compose myself, my mother found me. Of course, she did. "There you are," she said, her voice losing some of its public polish. "Feeling all right?" "Fine, Mother," I said, turning back to face her. The moonlight softened her features, but couldn't hide the familiar look in her eyes, a mixture of concern and veiled disappointment. "You seemed quiet during dinner," she pressed. Are you worried about something?" The question hung in the air, loaded. Was I worried about not living up to her expectations? Worried about my unconventional life? Worried that Thomas wasn't real enough? "No, Mother," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm just taking a moment." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Look," she said, her tone softening slightly, becoming almost sympathetic, which was somehow worse than the criticism. "I know you want different things than Sarah. That's fine. But you're not getting any younger. It's time to start thinking about your future. About security." There it was again. Security. Her definition of it, anyway. A stable job, a man with a visible career path, a predictable life. "Thomas is wonderful, dear, I'm sure," she continued, her voice patronizing. "But he seems a bit undefined. In this world, you need structure. You need someone solid. Someone who can provide for you, who has a clear path. You see, Mark? That's a man with a plan. That's a man you can build a life on." She reached out and patted my arm, a gesture meant to be comforting but felt like a dismissal. "You have so much potential," she sighed, as if this were a tragedy. "I just worry you're wasting it on someone who isn't substantial enough. It's not too late, you know. You could still find someone stable. Someone real." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Someone stable. Someone real. Spoken as if Thomas was neither. Spoken as if my relationship, my happiness, my future, were somehow less valid because they didn't fit her pre-approved blueprint. It wasn't just disapproval anymore, it was a full-blown negation of my reality. Everything I had built with Thomas, was being erased with a few carelessly cruel words. This was the deepest cut the moment the old wound didn't just sting, it bled. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, a feeling of utter helplessness against her relentless judgment. It was like drowning in expectations. My vision blurred for a moment, tears stinging my eyes. Was she right? Was I a fool? Was I living in a fantasy? The old insecurities, the ones I thought I had conquered, surged back with brutal force. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the moonlight. Maybe it was the taste of ash still in my mouth from her words. Maybe it was the thought of Thomas, standing inside, quiet and strong, utterly himself. A cold resolve settled over me, replacing the despair. I had spent my whole life trying to fit into her box, craving her approval. And for what? To be told, even now, that I wasn't good enough, that the man I loved wasn't real enough. A quiet fury started to simmer beneath the surface.
No.
Not anymore. I was tired of feeling less than. Tired of her measuring my life against Sarah's, against some outdated, materialistic standard. Thomas wasn't just enough. He was extraordinary. And he deserved to be seen, not just by me, but by the people who had so easily dismissed him. My mother needed to see. They all needed to see. Not for their approval, but for my own validation, for the release of this lifelong burden of judgment. I looked at my mother, her face etched with what she probably saw as motherly concern, but I saw as smug certainty.
She believed she knew best.
She believed her judgment was final. She believed she had just delivered a dose of harsh reality I desperately needed. The decision crystallized in that moment, sharp and clear. Thomas was scheduled to give a short toast later in the evening, a simple nod to the bride and groom as the groom's new brother-in-law's friend. That was how he was introduced on the seating chart, intentionally understated at his request, to keep the focus on Sarah and Mark.
But now
it needed to be different. My quiet partner, who preferred the shadows, needed to step into the light. Not for show, but for truth. For my truth. For our truth. I straightened up, a new strength flooding through me. The cold air felt invigorating now, not just refreshing. I looked my mother in the eye. "Mother," I said, my voice calm, though there was an edge of steel beneath it. "I understand your concerns. But you don't know Thomas." "Not really. You only see what you expect to see." She opened her mouth to protest, to offer more unsolicited advice, but I cut her off, gently but firmly. "Come," I said, taking her arm this time, my grip surprisingly strong. "Let's go back inside. I think there's something you need to see." We walked back into the ballroom. The music had started, people were beginning to dance. Thomas was still talking to the maid of honor, a small smile on his face. I walked directly towards him, my mother trailing slightly behind me, looking curious and a little wary. As I reached him, the DJ made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. We have a special guest who would like to offer a toast to the happy couple. Please welcome to the stage, Thomas Ashton." A ripple went through the crowd. Thomas Ashton? Some people recognized the name, others didn't. Thomas himself looked surprised, then his eyes met mine. He saw the look in my eyes, the quiet determination. He understood. He nodded, a subtle acknowledgement, and made his way towards the small stage set up for the band. My mother stood beside me, her initial curiosity replaced by a frown. "Thomas Ashton," she muttered. "Is he someone? I don't recognize the name." Her tone was dismissive, already slotting him back into the undefined category. The wedding planner, a woman known for her meticulous attention to detail and her ability to manage high-profile events, took the microphone from the DJ. She smiled, a wide, professional smile. "Thank you," she said into the mic, "and it's truly an honor to introduce our next speaker. He's a friend of the bride and groom and an innovator whose work has transformed industries worldwide. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Thomas Ashton, founder and CEO of Ether Dynamics." The air in the ballroom froze. It wasn't a gradual realization. It was instantaneous, like a sudden drop in temperature. Ether Dynamics. The name echoed through the room, a name synonymous with disruptive technology, with unfathomable wealth, with a level of influence that reshaped markets overnight. Thomas Ashton was notoriously private, rarely photographed, almost never gave interviews. He was a ghost in the machine, a titan of industry who preferred to operate from the shadows. My mother's smile didn't just falter, it shattered. Her eyes, fixed on the stage, went wide with disbelief. The color drained from her face, leaving it pale and ashen. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed composure, the mask of polite judgment, crumbled away, revealing pure, unadulterated shock. She wasn't the only one. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Heads swiveled. People fumbled for phones, trying to discreetly confirm what they had just heard. The aunt who had asked about security gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. The distant cousin who had made a snide remark about my bohemian choices suddenly looked intensely interested. The collective consciousness of the room shifted, power dynamics rearranging themselves in real time. Thomas walked onto the stage, calm and unassuming in his simple suit. He didn't stride or puff out his chest. He just walked, quietly confident. He adjusted the microphone slightly, his eyes scanning the room. He didn't look at me, didn't look at my mother. He looked at Sarah and Mark, his gaze warm and genuine. "Sarah," he began, his voice quiet but amplified perfectly through the sound system, carrying effortlessly through the stunned silence.
"Mark."
"It's a privilege to celebrate with you tonight." He spoke simply, eloquently, offering heartfelt congratulations and wishing them a lifetime of happiness. He spoke about the importance of partnership, of mutual respect, of finding someone who sees you and loves you for who you are. His words were simple, profound, and utterly devoid of any reference to wealth or status. He was just a man, offering a genuine toast to friends. But the room couldn't hear just the words. They heard the name that came before it. They saw the quiet power in his presence. They saw the man they had just learned was one of the wealthiest, most influential people on the planet. And they looked at me, standing beside my mother, who was still frozen, her face a mask of absolute shock. The contrast was brutal. My mother, just moments before, confidently dismissing Thomas as undefined, not substantial enough, not a real man, was now standing beside the man whose net worth likely exceeded the combined wealth of everyone else in the room by orders of magnitude. A man whose work shaped the future, whose security was beyond anything she could possibly comprehend. Her face twisted, a mixture of horror, embarrassment, and a dawning, sickening realization. Her rigid definition of a real man, stable job, clear path, predictable income, seemed ludicrous, almost pitiable, in the face of this. Thomas wasn't just real, he was a force of nature, a quiet giant who operated on a different playing field entirely. When Thomas finished his toast, the applause that followed was deafening, tinged with something more than just appreciation for the speech.
It was awe.
It was shock. It was a scramble for footing in this new reality. He stepped down from the stage and made his way back towards me. My mother's eyes followed him, wide and disbelieving. As he approached, she finally seemed to snap out of her paralysis, though her movements were jerky, uncertain. "Thomas, Mr. Ashton," she stammered, reaching a hand out as if to touch him, then pulling it back. Her voice was breathless, completely stripped of its usual rest. I had no idea." Thomas stopped in front of us. He looked at my mother, his expression unreadable, polite but distant. "Hello, Mrs. Evans," he said quietly. My mother's face was a kaleidoscope of warring emotions, shock, regret, a desperate attempt to regain her composure. She turned to me, her eyes pleading, silently begging for an explanation, for absolution. Her earlier condescension had vanished, replaced by a naked vulnerability I had never seen before. The judgment was gone, replaced by something like fear? Fear that she had misjudged so spectacularly, fear of what this meant, fear of my reaction. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt free. Free from her expectations, her definitions, her endless need to categorize and judge. Her words from earlier echoed in my mind. At least she found a real man. The irony was a sharp, cold blade. I didn't gloat. That wasn't my style, and it wasn't necessary. The truth of the moment was more powerful than any spoken words of triumph. I simply looked at my mother, then at Thomas, and a small, genuine smile finally touched my lips. Thomas turned his gaze to me, his eyes soft and understanding. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, meant only for me. I nodded, my smile widening slightly.
More than all right.
For the first time in my life, standing there in the middle of my sister's perfect, conventional wedding, I felt completely, utterly real. Real. Not by my mother's definition, but by my own. My mother stammered something else, an awkward apology or explanation. I don't remember the exact words. They faded into the background noise of the shocked room, the renewed music, the buzz of conversations filled with the name Thomas Ashton. She tried to engage Thomas, her tone now fawning, overly solicitous. The transformation was jarring, almost comical. The woman who had dismissed him was now practically bowing. Thomas handled it with quiet politeness, deflecting her attempts to draw him into conversation about his work or his status. He didn't rub it in, didn't make a scene. He simply existed, his presence a silent, irrefutable answer to her judgment. I watched him, my heart full. This was the man she had called undefined. Not substantial enough, he wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, wasn't seeking approval. He was just Thomas. And he was more real, more substantial, more secure in himself than anyone else I knew. His worth wasn't measured in dollars or titles, but in his character, his intelligence, his kindness, his quiet strength. These were the things my mother had been blind to, the things her narrow focus on conventional success had prevented her from seeing. The rest of the evening was surreal. My mother was visibly shaken, her usual confident stride replaced by a nervous energy. She kept glancing at Thomas, at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to process this seismic shift in her understanding of my life. Other relatives and family friends approached me, their attitudes completely changed. The polite inquiries about my non-existent, serious boyfriend were replaced by wide-eyed congratulations and clumsy attempts to connect. "You never said," they'd exclaim, as if I had intentionally hidden the truth to inconvenience them. I just smiled, offering vague pleasantries.
It wasn't about them.
The shift was fascinating and, in a way, sad. Their perception of me, of my relationship, hadn't changed because they suddenly recognized Thomas's character or saw the depth of our connection. It had changed because they recognized his name, his status, his wealth. It was a stark reminder of the world my mother inhabited, a world where external markers of success often trumped everything else. As the night wound down, my mother pulled me aside again, her eyes still wide and troubled. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I had no idea." "I know, Mother," I said softly. There was no anger left, just a vast weariness and a quiet sense of closure. "But why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her tone bewildered. All this time, I looked at her, seeing not just the critical mother, but the woman who had been trapped by her own rigid beliefs for so long. "Because it wasn't important," I said, choosing my words carefully. "His name, what he's built, that's his life, not ours. To me, he's just Thomas, the man I love." And then I added, gently but firmly, "You didn't see him, Mother. You saw what you expected to see. You judged him based on whether he fit your idea of real, his work, his success. None of that makes him real. What makes him real is his heart. And you missed it." She didn't have an answer. She just looked at me, her eyes full of a complicated mix of regret and dawning comprehension. Maybe, just maybe, a tiny crack had appeared in the wall of her preconceptions. Thomas joined us then, sensing the moment. He didn't ask what we were talking about. He just stood beside me, a silent presence. My mother looked at him again, this time with a different kind of awe, mixed with a profound awkwardness. "It was a beautiful wedding, Mother," I said, wanting to end the conversation, to step away from the weight of the past. She nodded mutely, still processing. The judgment, the criticism, the subtle put-downs that had been a constant hum throughout my life, They hadn't just been challenged, they had been utterly dismantled by the quiet presence of the man she had dismissed. Standing there, between the man I loved and the mother who had struggled to accept me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The need for her approval, the ache of her disappointment, finally loosened its grip. It wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about finally, completely, claiming my own truth. My life, my choices, my partner, they were not subject to her validation. They were simply mine, and they were enough. More than enough. Thomas wasn't a real man because of his billions. He was real because he saw me, because he loved me, because with him, I felt real. The wedding was over. The guests drifted away, buzzing with their newfound knowledge, their hastily revised opinions. My mother was quieter than I had ever seen her, her usual pronouncements replaced by a thoughtful, almost stunned silence. The dynamics had irrevocably shifted. It didn't magically erase the past, the years of feeling judged, the sting of those specific words. But it neutralized them. They no longer held power over me. The weight I had carried for so long felt lighter. I hadn't planned this moment, hadn't orchestrated it to embarrass my mother. It had happened organically, a confluence of her judgment and the simple truth of who Thomas was. And in that truth, I found my freedom. Walking away from the venue, hand in hand with Thomas, the night air cool and clean, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the money or the status, but for the man beside me, who had shown me what real truly meant, and in doing so, had helped me finally see myself. The path ahead wasn't laid out according to anyone else's map, and that felt like the most exhilarating kind of security there was. It was my path, our path, built on a foundation of genuine connection, far stronger than any external validation. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.